Hi guys, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now today we're speaking to ocean writer and PR freelancer Melissa Hobson. Now Mel is a passionate conservationist and she's passionate about communicating how we can all make a difference for the marine environment, for our planet and also for people's lives. She's a certified scuba diver and has worked in PR for over a decade, at first outside of the conservation industry and then more recently turning her considerable talents towards helping wildlife to flourish. During our chat, we talk about her work in PR and writing, and she shares tips on how to be a freelancer in conservation, winning clients, crafting messages that work. We also discuss her squiggly career to date and how she switched into conservation. Finally, Mel shares her advice for people like you who might be looking to work in conservation too. It's a wide-ranging, engaging and really fun discussion. Enjoy.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Melissa Hobson. I'm a freelance marine conservation writer and PR consultant.
Great. Well, welcome, Melissa. Thanks for joining the Conservation Careers podcast. It's nice to kind of connect and get to know you. And just before we kind of hit record, we were talking about connections in conservation, and there's already kind of some nice connections between us as well with Stella, one of our bloggers from the day who you're supporting at the moment. And yeah, it's great to have you on. Where to start then? So I'd like to kind of explore your role, your work. You're a PR freelancer and you're supporting kind of marine conservation organizations. Paint a little picture as to, what it is you do then. How do you support people? What sort of things are you up to?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit of a slasher, which sounds like something to do with Halloween, but I tend to do a bit of PR consultancy slash a bit of writing. Those are kind of my main two types of work that I focus on at the moment. But
Yep.
within the writing space, I do editorial work, so writing for magazines or publications, writing articles, blogs, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I also do copywriting for organizations who maybe know what they do, but they don't know how to explain it to someone who doesn't understand the ins and outs and the jargon of, that can come up in the conservation sector.
Yeah.
So actually, the writing sides of things and the PR and the media relations side of things are separate in one way, but all kind of go hand in hand and can interweave because it's all part of communicating what you do in a way that makes people who don't understand the sector maybe, or, kind of lay people understand and really engage with what you do, why it's important.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. Who's your typical client or customer then? If you're working like freelance and presumably therefore networking and growing your contact and relationships with people, what's a typical kind of client for you and how do you find them, connect them? How do you secure work? I mean, don't share your secret sauce or, whatever you don't want to share, but I'd love to hear, there are lots of people listening who'd like to kind of follow a freelance route and you're obviously doing well in that. And then a follow-up question would be, once you're connected to an employer and you're working together, and how do you then turn what they give you into something which is really clear and well written, just talking from the writing piece? Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to go back to the first couple of questions first and then remind me to come back to the second one. So in terms of who are my typical clients, there is quite a range there. I do a little bit of kind of more general sustainability work as well, which might be for example, a corporate organization that is doing interesting work in the sustainability space.
Mm-hmm.
I might work with, I've done a few bits in the last year with town councils, interestingly enough, who have, one had a marine conservation initiative that they were launching that they needed help with the messaging and with the launch itself. Another one needed some sustainability blogs doing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it might be a small startup or a solopreneur, one-man band doing interesting things in the conservation or sustainability space that need a bit of guidance and expertise that, when you're doing everything on your own. And I know personally as a freelancer, I might turn to a website expert or someone else to get some experience in their field.
Yeah.
And then I do, at the moment, I have a retainer client with guide dogs. So not conservation at all, but still in the third sector.
Yeah.
And that's with their comms team.
Yeah.
And then when the editorial side of things, so writing for publications, that tends to be the way it usually works is that you'll come up with an article idea or a story idea, pitch it to the editor, and you have to persuade them to say yes to be able to then get that commission and write that work. So yeah, with the editorial side of things, it's always thinking, always kind of pitching, trying to build up relationships with the journalists themselves, and it's usually piece by piece. In terms of my retainer client, how I got that one actually, which I'm happy to spill the secrets if it helps anyone else. I saw that they were recruiting for a job on their comms team. I think it was a comms officer role or something like that. And I just think they're a fantastic charity doing brilliant work for people with sight loss. So I saw the head of comms lady's details were on the kind of job spec.
Yeah.
And I emailed her and I said, look, I'm not at the level that you're recruiting for. It was like an entry level post. Yeah. I'm a freelancer, so I'm not looking for a full-time job. Yeah. But if you ever need an extra pair of hands that can do this, spell out my experience and that kind of thing. And, because I have a lot of experience in the comms sector, you can just throw me stuff. You don't need to train me because I've done it. Yeah. And if you ever just need someone who can be on hand as, you can fire me stuff and I'll fire it back to you, then, file my details and drop me a line. And I've tried that with, various other kind of job ads that I've seen, and obviously it doesn't work for everyone. But in this instance, they came back a couple of months later when they were struggling to recruit and needed support on a project and asked if I'd, be willing to help out. And one project led to another, and I've been working with them for quite a while now. So that's always a good tip I kind of offer people when they're looking for freelance work. Obviously, sometimes people are, if they're recruiting for a full-time job, they might be looking for a full-time PAYE person in-house. Yeah. But often it shows you that, they've got the need there. So if it's something that you can help with, why not have that conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. I've not thought of that approach before, actually, sort of seeing jobs advertised and then seeing that as a kind of like a signal that they're looking for communication support, and actually they might not need to employ someone, they can get someone in more flexibly. Yeah, I mean, I guess communications PR in smaller charities is often one of the areas where it's got kind of sits on the side of lots of different people's jobs. It's not one individual doing comms work or marketing or related. It's sort of something that everyone does a bit of, someone like you sort of parachuting in with your expertise can really move the needle, for want of a better word, quite quickly.
Yeah, and I think particularly in small organizations, often a small charity might have a comms team of one. I know I've definitely been that person. And that person is supposed to be an expert in social media and PR and graphic design and video and realistically, you can be a generalist that's strong in a lot of those things, but you can't be an expert in everything. So sometimes it might be that an organization has a generalist that's managing most of the comms, but needs someone to come in that's, I don't know, a TikTok strategist, because that's where they really don't have those expertise. Or, in my kind of world, it's obviously, the PR and the writing to maybe help on a specific project or a launch or something like that. But yeah, it might be the same if someone's a videographer or a graphic designer or something like that. And I certainly, been in-house in the past, kind of looking after general bits of comms and trying to bring in, a freelance graphic designer, because there is no point me spending a day on Adobe trying to do something that would be 3 times as bad as they could do in an hour,
Yeah, that's well put. Absolutely. Yeah. What sort of, how important is communications, PR, editing, the sorts of skills that you kind of deploy How important is that for the conservation movement? Like, what difference can and does it make?
I mean, I'm obviously biased, but
Yeah,
I would
that's
say
fine.
it's absolutely critical. The work that organizations are doing in the conservation sector, it's so vital that people outside of your, internal organization or your bubble understand what you do and want to support it. And I think a good example of that is the Blue Planet effect that we
Mm-hmm.
had a few years ago. David Attenborough's Blue Planet went on TV, and suddenly everyone had their eyes open to a world that, a lot of people had never been scuba diving, or they'd never seen these amazing places. And it really hit home to them why they needed to help and do something to protect these amazing environments. And I think that's just one example. But every single charity, or conservation organization, if you want members of the public, or if you want people in government or in decision-making positions in corporates, to support what you do, whether that be through policy, through donations, through fundraising, whatever it might be, they need to understand and care about what you do. And how are they going to, how are they going to know? How are they going to care if you're not communicating with them effectively? So yeah, I'd say it's really, really important to have a good comms strategy.
Yeah. And how does one go about crafting messages that can achieve change for people? Like, what what are the building blocks of a really solid message? I mean, I'm thinking about Blue Planet with Sir David Attenborough, and that was so big, and it made a huge impression for marine plastic pollution. What he's done, from my viewpoint, through his career, is sell the beauty of the natural world to everyone and get everyone excited about it. And we're all in awe of the wonders that he's shared. But almost, maybe not for the first time, but certainly more recently in Blue Planet, he connected it to action. He sort of said it's beautiful. There's a problem. You can do something about it, and more sort of leaning towards encouraging action. And it did. A lot of people now, and governments and civil and everything else, has sort of changed to try and tackle that as a particular issue that was highlighted. But if you were sort of crafting a message for an organization, a campaign, or whatever it might be, like, what are the kind of the ingredients you kind of put into a good editorial or a PR piece or whatever? Like, what would you like to share around that?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I would say for me, usually the conversations that I would have initially with someone that's kind of thinking about what story they want to tell and how they're going to tell it is, who do you want to tell that story to?
Mm-hmm.
Who's your target audience?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't know who you're talking to, you're not going to know how to reach them effectively. And
And on
just to,
that, I mean, how specific would you get with a target audience, for instance? Like, what would be an example?
I mean, it can really vary. I'm trying to think of a specific example. So, say, for example, there's a conservation organisation in Sussex that needs volunteers to help with its litter picks.
Perfect.
So, there's no point me speaking to people in Lancashire because they're not going to be able to come to that event, just as kind of one example. Maybe it's something that is a family friendly event that you're running or something like that. Are you looking at speaking to parents, families? That might lead to kind of, okay, well, are we looking at the parenting magazines rather than, maybe a corporate business magazine? So you can really tailor things by so many different elements.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that you have to. It might be that you do have a broad audience of the general public, in
Yeah.
which case you kind of be thinking about things like, okay, well, if it's just a general member of the public who we want to inspire to care a little bit more about the type of stuff that we do, then I tend to think of that as if I was talking to my dad, call him Papa Ray, like, would Papa Ray understand what we're talking about, and how would we make it interesting to him. Sometimes he doesn't know this, but I sometimes will do a little experiment, you know, for having a cup of tea, kind of chatting about what I'm working on and kind of thinking, oh, okay, it's that element that you found more interesting or you kind of vibed with, and it's that term that you said, oh, I don't, you know, what does that actually mean? What is a kelp forest, or, you know, what is blue carbon, those kind of things. So yeah, you can kind of flip it lots of different ways. And I think if someone's kind of starting out in their comms, I wouldn't stress too much about like, oh, you know, we need to have Sally who's 45 and works as a receptionist, you know, that specific, which sometimes at the ad agencies and the creative agencies, they do get super specific.
Yeah.
You don't need to, but it's just if you have any elements that can give you that information, then it's all a little clue about how you can speak to those people, because you've got a picture of that person in your mind. You might know someone that, you know, likes those type of things as well. It might be hobby related or whatever it might be. So, you know, you might be speaking to divers in a different way that you might be speaking to hikers, or those kind of things.
So that's really interesting. Yeah. So target the audience, get to know the audience a little bit, understand them. Yeah. And then how do you then communicate with them? What are the elements of a good message or a good communications piece? What you're thinking through, or the do's and don'ts, you know what? Yeah.
So in terms of the elements of a good message, the way I often work when I'm doing a messaging project is the client will send me lots of information. Usually it's heaps and they're apologizing for bombarding me with stuff, but that's really helpful to kind of immerse myself in who they are, what they do. But then actually I hop on a call with them for an hour. I'm like, right, I've read all that. You know, that's cool that you send it to your stakeholders and it's in your corporate report and it's maybe all a little bit jargony, because that's often the case, a little bit, sometimes a bit dry. But let's just chat about what you do. You know, let's get super informal, and kind of following those points of interest. That's often where you can start to get those real nuggets of the things that spark people's interest, but also how people explain things when they're not feeling like they have to do a presentation and, you know, be all formal. Because I think that's often a nice way to get some really eloquent sound bites.
Yeah.
So that's one of the kind of processes that I will follow. And obviously the type of wording that I'm going to use will vary depending on, you know, if it's going to go in a corporate report, it might sound a bit different than if it's in a kind of chatty blog post.
Yeah.
But that will be one thing that I'll be thinking about. And then in terms of a wider comm strategy as well, once we've thought of who is this person or who are these people that we want to reach, where are they? So, and by that I mean, if I have a middle-aged golfer who only reads the golfing magazines, I don't know why I've thought of golfing as an example, and he reads this golfing magazine.
See, I'm guessing your dad's a golfer, but I might be wrong. Is he?
No, he's not.
Okay, right. Okay, maybe.
Dad's into steam trains, so. But say, for example, you've got this really niche magazine with 500 subscribers a month, so, you know, not very big. You're actually better to be targeting that tiny magazine where you have a really engaged audience than trying to get in, say, the Daily Mail, where you're going to get huge reach, huge reach, but none of the people are the right people. So it's kind of thinking about, it can often be sometimes a bit of an ego play, I think, in terms of like, oh, we got in this magazine and it has this huge circulation. That can be brilliant. And sometimes, obviously, you know, there's going to be crossover, that someone does read the Mail as well. So you might pick up on people in that way. But if your target audience isn't reading the magazine or isn't on the social media channel that you're communicating through, you're just screaming into the void, really. So that's a really important part, I think, of something to work through in your comms plan, because whether you're spending actual budget in terms of advertising or advertorials, or if you're spending, the team's time in setting up these opportunities, you're going to be wasting it if you're not targeting that in the right place.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Really nicely put. While you were talking about sort of listening to people as well and having conversations, it sparked, example from myself in the last week or so that kind of rung true as well, whereby we're exploring we're actually currently supporting like a cohort of mid-career conservation professionals in trying to further their impact and happiness within conservation, like a professional development program. And we're sort of figuring out, well, what are the challenges they're facing? How can we help them? What are some of their goals? And they're many and varied, an audience like that. Some of them are burnt out. Some of them want career planning and development. Some of them are not perhaps getting the support they want from, within their organizations, that sort of stuff. And we did a survey. I was looking through the results and trying to kind of think about messaging a bit. And someone put the comment, I want my career mojo back. And to me, it's like, clink, oh,
Yeah.
In a few words, you've basically said it. That was so, it sort of made my hair stand up. Yeah, that's spot on. Were we to think about marketing and sales and what we might use, that comment was so clear to me. I think we know what that person means now. Yeah.
And I think it's a really important point that you just touched on there in terms of, doing that survey to hear from your audience in their words, what do they want? And I know sometimes I've had conversations with clients and they're like, oh, do you think how much do you think we should price these different donation options? Or do you think we should do this? Or do you think our audience are interested in this? And it's like, well, I could take a guess. I could.
Yeah.
But is there a way that we can ask your audience? Do you have a Facebook page where you can kind of chat and ask questions? Are you going to do a survey? Do you have focus groups? You don't necessarily have to do a huge, expensive piece of research, of course, especially if you're a small organization. But maybe you have a friendly donor who's happy to have a little chat and talk about why are they passionate about your work? What brought them to support you? Where did they find you? Or even sometimes you'll see on their website when you go to make a donation, where did you find us? Things like that can be really important data. And I always make sure I fill those in, especially if I found someone through PR. Give the PR team the credit. But yeah, asking those questions and finding ways to speak to your audience to get the answer rather than just putting a finger in the wind.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love it. Yeah. And nowadays you do have direct access to your audience, often like social media. It can be quite quick, quite instant, quite cheap. Yeah, fantastic. PR, public relations, like I don't think I have a super clear idea as to what PR is. It's a word a lot of us use quite casually, but you work in PR professionally. That's a big part of your background as well. Like, explain it to us. What is it and how can it help conservation?
Yeah, so to start off with, I had probably worked in PR for about a year without really having any idea what PR was.
There you go. Okay, I'm not alone. Good.
So I think a lot of people are probably going to hear the term and maybe have a bit of an idea what it means, but not be super clear on it.
Yeah.
For me, public relations is all about the impression that external people have of your organization and kind of managing that relationship. So for me, a lot of the time that's through media relations. So how does the press cover your organization? Where are people seeing you featured? It's one segment of the bigger marketing piece, really. There's often a bit of a kind of fuzzy gray line in terms of, does social media count as PR? Is it completely separate? Different types of marketeers will have different opinions on that. And within the sector, often people will talk about owned and earned and paid media.
Yeah, what does that mean? I've heard that, yeah.
So owned media are your own channels.
Yeah.
So something that you have complete control over what goes in there.
So your
that's going to
website.
be your website, your social media, you might have a blog. That's all your owned media. Earned media is things that you can have an influence over, but a lot of the time it might be the way other people talk about you. So in earned media, other people's social media posts about you and what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Press coverage, so magazine articles and those kind of things that you might have put a lot of work into getting that feature, contacting the journalist, giving them the information, but you don't have complete control over that messaging. That would kind of fall into the earned media bubble. And then obviously the paid media is going to be adverts and advertorials, sponsored posts, boosted kind of social media posts, anywhere where you've put that ad spend behind it. Mm-hmm. And PR kind of tends to fall into that earned media category. So you're working with journalists a lot of the time, or potentially influencers, to inspire them to write about what you do. Mm-hmm. But not necessarily, you don't have full control over that article. You can give them all of the information and set up that piece, but then it's kind of down to them to write it up.
Yeah, it's interesting, the word influencer there as well. That's quite a modern word, isn't it, really? I mean, something we're all quite comfortable with now. We sort of know what it means. But 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, we wouldn't have been using that term,
No, absolutely.
And PR would have been about approaching newspapers, magazines, things like that. But now you can approach influencers. And I'm using the term in my world as a social media type influencer, someone who has an audience that I'd like to connect with. Yeah. Mm. Are there influencers within the conservation space that can really help as channels, and how do you sort of find, reach, use them?
Yeah, there absolutely are. I don't do so much specifically in the social media space anymore. Sometimes it might kind of form a small part of a strategy that I'm doing. In terms of how you find them, I think one thing to think about is the size of the influencer. The bigger they get, yes, the bigger the reach in terms of their audience, but also the more difficult probably it's going to be to get in touch with them and be able to work with them.
Yeah.
And also the more likely that they're going to charge a fee for a post. The big kind of influencers with hundreds of thousands or millions of followers are often, charging top dollar. They get money in for those kind of sponsor posts.
Yep.
So actually you might be looking for someone who has a smaller but more engaged following, mm-hmm. and is relevant to what you do. That's going to vary for different conservation organizations. I'd say one thing to be really careful about, though, is to do your due diligence when you're thinking about these influencers. It can be really easy to have seen someone online and they do this great stuff in the ocean and brilliant, tick, let's approach this person. But have a look at some of their older posts, do a bit of research. Is there anything that doesn't align with your values? Mm-hmm. Because it might be that they tick certain boxes in some ways and in other ways actually really don't. Mm-hmm. And you want to make sure that there's no potential backlash or just kind of mismatch because you've partnered with someone who isn't actually best fit for you. So I'd say, really doing your research there is important, rather than, maybe getting carried away because someone's trending at the moment and they did, a huge post that went viral and everyone's talking about them. Mm-hmm. That's great. But, just thinking carefully about, are they really a good fit for you?
Again, controlling your brand, really, which is almost how you framed PR, which is, a useful way of thinking about it for me.
Yeah. And it might be something really silly, but for example, is there someone who's, talking about conservation and they really care about reef restoration, and they've talked about that a lot recently, mm-hmm. but there's loads of, single-use plastic bottles popping up in their posts, or they're often getting single-use coffee cups, or are they, things like that might be quite subtle. But are there things that go against who you are and what you do as an organization, that might pop up, because people do see that kind of stuff. They're like, oh, you're partnering with this person who's well known for having argued about XYZ or done this or held this. There's everything we do is recorded these days. So just thinking about the little things as well, I think, is important.
Yeah, good advice. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your career then, if that's all right, and the journey you've taken to where you are now. When you look back, like what have been the kind of key moments in your career leading up to doing exactly what we've been discussing? What have you been up to previously?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a funny one, because looking back, it feels quite inevitable that I would have ended up here. At the time and through my career, it was very squiggly.
Yeah, so in hindsight, it's very straight, but actually the journey was...
hindsight, I can join up all of those dots.
Yeah.
At the time, if you told me 10, 15 years ago that I would have been specializing in marine conservation writing, I would have been quite surprised, I would imagine. So in terms of kind of the key milestones, I guess, my early career was in PR agencies. So doing a lot of food and drink products, trying to get coverage around coffee and ice cream and all sorts of things. That is absolutely not my bag, but I learned a lot. But rewinding kind of a little bit before that, when I was at university, and I didn't know it at the time, but this was going to be a big milestone for me. I was on holiday in Australia, and my travel agent talked me into learning to scuba dive, and really did talk me into it. I wasn't particularly a water baby growing up, grew up in a landlocked town in the UK. So I kind of figured, I'll give it a go. Absolutely hated it. When I was doing the training, I remember thinking, I've just got, a few more days of this, and then I never have to do this stupid hobby again. Which completely changed the moment I got in the ocean and just blew my mind. And that was a real game changer. And again, I remember thinking, it's such a shame that this is amazing, but I was living in Bristol at the time at university, not so much diving in Bristol.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's a shame that I won't be able to do this again. And then I think I went on another holiday at some point that I managed to, was near the coast, and thought, maybe I'll do my refresher. And then I started planning dive holidays specifically. And then probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I was working with a different PR agency at this point, and kind of had a realization that the element of PR that I really love is the writing. But a lot of the time, as a PR professional, you might write an article, send it to an editor, and they will, edit it. Your name's not going to be on it because you're the PR person, and they'll pop their name at the top, which is how it goes. That's fine. But I thought, actually, maybe I could give it a go to get my work published. And I started writing for Diver magazine. So then I started doing kind of specific dive reviews, and that's where I started kind of really doing the editorial side of things, always around the edges of other things. And then in 2018, I'd been in London probably coming up a decade, had a cheeky bit of burnout, quit my job, wanted to do something different, and had the amazing opportunity to go out to Mozambique and help Marine Megafauna Foundation with their comms, which I did as a volunteer for around 8 or 9 months. So based out in a coastal town in Mozambique, working with the team there and kind of figuring out how to tell their story and raise awareness of the amazing work that they do. And that was kind of the moment, I guess, that my background in communications finally linked up with my passion for the ocean and for diving. And then, I went full-time freelance a couple of years ago. And now I do little bits of, sustainability and third sector stuff. Obviously, I mentioned guide dogs, but my niche is is really the marine conservation world, and it's just something that I love doing. I love writing about it. It's so brilliant to be able to, you know, have a commission that gives me the opportunity to geek out about jellyfish or stingrays or something with a scientist, and then write an article about it to tell everyone else how cool this jellyfish or stingray or whatever is. So yeah, it's retrospectively the dots have all joined up to where I am now, but there was a lot of squiggling at the time.
I love it. And what's it like to be a freelancer? I mean, what are the kind of highs and lows of that? How's it feel? Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant and it's really challenging.
Right.
I guess, you know, with everything, there's pros and cons, right?
Yep.
In terms of, for me, the highs, I have complete flexibility over what I do and when I do it. You know, yesterday I took the day off and went into London and played mini golf with a loads of other freelancers who I know from kind of my online network, and it was our first in real life meetup.
Nice.
Check with anyone or book a day's holiday or anything like that. You know, I can really plan my days and my weeks around what works best for me. And that also includes things like, I know in the middle of the afternoon, I have a slump and my brain's not going to be the sharpest. Sometimes in in-house roles, you know, you can't just go off for an hour's walk in the middle of the afternoon because you're feeling a bit slumpy. But I can now, you know, I can work when I'm most focused and when I'm most on it, and I can take the time to rest when I need to. And then also I have the variety of being able to do lots of different projects and work with lots of different people. So those are all things that I absolutely love about it. On the flip side, the challenges, obviously there's the kind of peaks and troughs of freelancing. You can be very, 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 very busy, or you can be very quiet. So I try, if I can, to keep myself in between. But, you know, it can be a bit of a worry if it's feeling like it's a quiet month. Equally, it can be completely headache inducing when you've got so much on, and, you know, clients that were supposed to happen next month have turned up early, and things that were supposed to happen last month have been delayed, and everything explodes together. So you do need to have those kind of organizational skills. And also, you know, I'm a sole trader. Some people might be running their own limited company. Either way, you're doing most of this on your own. I do my own accounts. I do my own invoicing. I have to chase up when there's late payments. I have to do my own marketing. I have to build my own website. You know, you can hire other people to do those things if you can, you know, save up those funds and you can justify that investment. But there is a lot to do. And I think sometimes people might think, oh, you know, I love graphic design. I love being a graphic designer, so I'm going to be a freelance graphic designer. But if you don't love the business elements of it, you know, the planning and the marketing and all that kind of thing, sometimes people can find that difficult as well.
Yeah, really interesting. How much of your time is taken up with business development or relationship building, or like the sales funnel, if you like? You've obviously got relationships and clients, and I'm sure you're looking to nurture and keep them. But how much do you have to keep an eye on? I've got to keep new people coming in and finding and connecting and growing. Is that a juggling act, or is that something that happens naturally? Or do you get to a point where you don't need to do it anymore because you've got what you need? Or
yeah, I mean, I think for me, it happens fairly naturally. I guess, again, being a comms person, I'm always got half an eye on kind of marketing and that kind of thing. Probably my biggest channel in terms of leads is LinkedIn. So I'm super, super active on LinkedIn. I'm posting there a lot and engaging with people on there. So that's something that I try and schedule time every day. I'll be nipping in and commenting and, you know, liking things and chatting about what I'm up to. Not super strategic on there. It just tends to be posting what I feel like and what I think people are going to be interested in. I think one of the really good tips that I've heard from various other freelancers is that you need to keep marketing all the time, even if you're busy, because if it gets to the point that your work has dried up, these leads take a long time to nurture. So if you're busy, and then suddenly gets quiet, and that's when you try to start doing your marketing, it might take 1, 2, 6 months before those, kind of people turn into leads or need your work. So I think it's something that you do have to slice out the time all the time, which can be challenging when you're like, I don't want any more clients. Why would I be marketing myself right now?
Yeah.
But yeah, I probably have, not entirely on the marketing, but probably 1 day a week is kind of non-client work. So working on my business, whether that be marketing, updating the website, doing my books, all that kind of thing. So,
or playing mini golf. That's where the golf connection came from. This is your day yesterday.
That's what it was. Should have read some golfing magazines before that for some tips. Awful.
A lot of people listen to us or come to us because they're aspiring conservationists. They're really passionate. It's very similar to your background, really. Lots of skills, but perhaps not working for the right cause. What advice would you give people who are looking to either switch or start careers in conservation? What do you think is most important to bear in mind?
So I think I was in exactly that space when I left my PR agency in London, and I was looking around and kind of thinking about, like, I'd love to do something in marine conservation. And I was looking online, and there seemed to be, from what I could see, 2 options, just kind of 2 ends of the extreme.
Yep.
Either I could go back to university or school for your American listeners and do a marine biology or a biology degree, and then a master's, and then a PhD, and then maybe work for free for a bit to then fight a load of other PhD students for marine biologist role somewhere amazing. But I thought, A, that's very expensive and going to take about 10 years, and B, I am not a scientist. I do now find science super interesting, but I'm not a scientist, and that wasn't a route that I wanted to take. The other option that was kind of visible at the time was the interesting world of voluntourism, where I saw things that were asking you to pay £3,000 a week to go and help with, I don't know, coral reef conservation restoration efforts, something like that. And I thought, I'm happy to volunteer. I'm happy to cover my own costs, which is what I ended up doing when I was in Africa. But if I'm paying £3,000 a week, I'm going to go on a week's holiday and have to come back to work. That's not sustainable. And also, me being taught how to do coral restoration or rhino conservation or whatever it is, I'm not really adding value. And often with those organizations, the profits are not necessarily staying locally. So I actually really got to a sticking point where I thought, are these the only 2 options? And I emailed a shark scientist who I'd interviewed for an article a couple of years before, and seen him, kept popping up on my networks. And I emailed him and said, I'm really sorry to bother you because you're going to get emails like this all the time, but is this, is this my options if I was to go into the conservation space? Kind of expecting he'd not come back because he gets bombarded with emails, I'm sure. And he actually replied and said, well, the thing is, Mal, we've got loads of scientists. We're flooded with marine biologists in the marine conservation sector. That's obviously quite an obvious route for people. But we don't have people with comms skills, with accounting skills, with, graphic design skills, video skills. Actually, that's an area where you can add so much value, because often, particularly with a small organization, they struggle to find people, and maybe they might not be advertising those roles and things like that. And that was Dr. Simon Pearce, who in his email, and this is how I got to Mozambique, he said, oh, are you emailing me because I've got my own charity. And I thought, do you?
I am now.
um, I wasn't, but hi. And it turns out that MMF had been looking for someone to help with their comms for a really long time and hadn't been able to find someone with the right skill set. And, I'd then been looking for a charity that I could help and hadn't found someone who was advertising that role. So it's a little bit long-winded, but my point being, if you're coming from a role or with experience outside of the sector, you are probably going to have really, really useful expertise. Conservation organizations, they are, even if it's a charity, they will run as a business and they will need all the different types of skills that you will need to have within a business. So you can be an accountant and have a conservation impact. And I have a really good friend who came to Mozambique as well and was helping on their finance team and sorting out all their accounts and all that math stuff that I hate. But the same with graphic design. You might be talented at social media. You might be, gosh, all sorts. Motion graphics. What's your thing? What makes you stand out? And how can you use that to add value to the organization or the cause that you want to help? So yeah, I'd really encourage people to think about what value you can add rather than worrying that you don't have the same skills that everyone else in that sector has. That's actually, that's beneficial because you're not then going to be fighting all these people that do the same things and having to showcase how you're different to them.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And I think there's a worry often with switchers, as I would call them, looking outside in, of like imposter syndrome, of feeling like you're not a scientist or you don't have this label of conservationist, which is on a pedestal. And actually, it's amazing. Conservation organizations are looking for people with particular expertise more and more often from outside, the conservation industry, bringing them in. And communications is a perfect example of that, where you can have huge impact straight away.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you can apply to so many different roles. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important that imposter syndrome can come in so easily, whoever you are and whatever your background is. I have a good friend, Sam Andrews, who's a marine conservation writer as well. She is a scientist and I'm not. And we both have our strengths. People often say to me when I say I, write in the marine conservation space, and they say, "Oh, well, so how did you get to doing that from being a marine biologist?" I'm like, "Oh no, I'm not a scientist." There are going to be benefits coming to the comm space from a science background. There are also benefits, for me coming from the comms background gives me that bit of space that actually maybe I can pick out the jargon a little bit more easily and stop people and pause and get them to explain things in wording that, would Papa Ray understand? Would someone understand if they don't naturally, I'm very comfortable talking about these type of topics and I understand, say, carbon sequestration, but I also can recognize maybe more quickly than someone that's trained in that field, like, oh, jargon, acronym, jargon, let's take a step back, let's bring this back down to, I kind of talk about it, translating science into English.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you don't use words that people understand, you're going to lose them. That message isn't going to land. Yeah, so Absolutely. Important. Yeah. Oh gosh, I could chat all day, but I'm also acknowledging time and the time that you've kind of shared with us for the podcast too. So, to wrap up, I often ask like one or two sort of more open questions, really, and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts around, as a conservation movement, we're still not having the impact that we would like. We're still seeing wildlife, being challenged, across the globe and often still declining, moving in the wrong direction. What do you think we as conservationists need to be better at or do more of, or, how can we change this up?
Great question. And you said we didn't want to be here all day. We could go for hours with this.
Go for another hour. No, yeah.
But in a kind of, to answer briefly, I would say one of the things is to realize that not everyone is in our bubble. And by that, I mean, being in the conservation sector, I think people are so passionate about what we can do for the environment. there are a lot of people who either don't care, don't know, don't understand, or they do care, but they have other issues, that, for example, if we've got a single mum with 3 kids in the energy crisis, talking about how she can save the planet is not going to make her change behaviors. But if you think about it, a lot of those behaviors, switching things off, you lowering the thermostat, wearing a blanket, they're all going to help her save money as well. So I think, and again, it comes back to thinking about your audience, realistically thinking about what's going to make people care, or what's going to encourage people to make a change, even if they don't care. Is there something else actually that, this ticks a box for them as well? And kind of the second part of that, I think, would be people often get paralysis when they think about just the size of the scale of the problem that we're facing, right? I know I do. Sometimes I think about it and I'm like, how can we make a difference? But I think breaking it down into something that's really achievable. I would sometimes, when I chat to people, they say, oh, so what's the biggest thing I can do to have an environmental impact? They're not going to like the answer if I tell them to go vegan, never fly again, and don't have children, But if they could have 1 fewer meat-based meals a week, then maybe that becomes a habit, and then it becomes 2. Maybe that habit then leads them to think about their plastic a bit more carefully, or, so I think those tiny steps are really important, particularly for people outside the sector. And I think that's something that we could try and communicate a little bit better. The fact that you don't need to be perfect to start. No one is perfect when it comes to sustainability and conservation, but taking action, even if it's absolutely tiny, is really important, because if we're all doing it, it's going to add up a lot quicker than us all thinking, oh, well, when I think I can be perfect, then I'll start, because otherwise we'll never get anywhere.
Yeah, you're right. And we said it before, conservation is a communications challenge nowadays. Like, how do we're very good at preaching to the converted, it seems. It's my perspective, but how do we reach these other much, bigger, often less engaged audiences? What can we do? What can we motivate? Yeah. And I love that sort of tiny habits. Yeah, just small things can really add up, make a big difference. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, on that optimistic note, thank you again for jumping on the podcast, Melissa. It's been great kind of talking to you, getting to know you a little bit as well. If people want to find out a bit more about you, where should we send them? Where should they go?
Yeah, so thank you. It's been lovely to chat. I've really enjoyed it. My website is melissahobson.co.uk. So there's lots of information about me on there. And you can follow me on LinkedIn as well. I'm Melissa Hobson, and I've started sharing actually a tiny tip each Tuesday of one teeny tiny thing you can do for conservation, and trying to encourage other people to share those as well. So those are the places you best to find me.
Great. Tuesday tip day. We'll keep an eye out for it. Love it.
I had to alliterate it so I don't forget.
Great. Thanks again, Melissa. It's great having you on.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people. Now, if you want our help to get clear and get started and get hired as a professional conservationist, I recommend you enroll in our free online training program, exploring how to get a conservation job. So if you're a student, a job seeker, or a career switcher, you'll learn the golden rule about how to get started, the key mistakes to avoid, and also we'll answer your biggest questions. You can check that out at conservation-careers.com/free. See you soon.